Hey everybody, this is John from Pioneer Nexus MTGO with another quick deck overview for you. As a friendly reminder, if you do like these informative, quick deck overviews, please consider subscribing to the channel, give me a thumbs up, leave me a constructive comment down below. So this up, we're playing looking at yet another Izzet spell-based deck. Obviously the most notable in the format is Izzet Phoenix. This deck trades in your Phoenixes and Ledger Shredders and things on the ice for Young PZ and Iron Squeezy. Young Pyromancer, third path Iconoclast. They do very similar things. Obviously, when Pyromancer, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, put a 1/1 red elemental token into play. Third path Iconoclast, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact token. Essentially, you're trying to cast a bunch of spells, make a bunch of dudes, overwhelm your opponent's removal, and kill them as quickly as possible. You're playing a lot of the same tools you will see in Izzet Phoenix. Playing things like Spikefield Hazard and Fiery Impulse. You're also playing Obliterating Bolt as opposed to something like Lava Axe, as you're not really trying to discard cards for value like you do with Arclight Phoenix. And then beyond that, you're just trying to hold your opponent at bay with things like Fading Hope, Make Disappear, etc. Just kind of tempoing your opponent out while trying to protect one of your key creatures for a turn or two. Then you try to close out things with Balmor Battle Mage. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain trample until end of turn, effectively turning your army of 1/1s into a bunch of Monastery Mentor tokens and threatening to kill your opponent basically out of nowhere. Well, not really out of nowhere, but they think they can chump block you all day, or force you to chump attack, and all of a sudden you're dealing all this damage out of nowhere. Beyond that, you get to play Of One Mind, because, well, you're playing humans, and they create non-humans, so you get to draw cards for two. 2 cards, 1 mana, seems pretty good. Treasure Cruise, busted Delve Spell, gotta play a few of them if you're playing the Pioneer format. Obviously, not playing too many lands because you are playing a deck with a bunch of cantrips, ops, considers, etc., so no reason to play a bunch of lands because then you'll flood out. But you do get to play some things like Otawaru, Sokensen, Hall of the Storm Giants, Dead of the Bugbear. A little bit of utility lands. Most of the 2-color decks get to. Why not? Game plan, a little bit how it's a little bit different than Izzet Phoenix. Obviously, Phoenix has a little bit more of a go-over-the-top element with the time walks and the galvanic iterations. This deck is more of a go wide, kill your opponent kind of pseudo-token strategy. Obviously, weaknesses of this deck, it's a little bit more vulnerable to removal than Phoenix, but nowhere near as vulnerable to Graveyard Hate. Is really the only card that gets terribly impacted by that is Treasure Cruise, and if your opponent's bringing in a bunch of Graveyard Hate for that, you're feeling pretty good about yourself because your threats are pretty nasty overall. Sideboard, the usual red, white, or red Izzet stuff. You get access to Gigantha, which is always nice. Then you get to play a bunch of grindy cards, things like Outpost Siege and Ral for grindy matchups. You get to bring in Unlicensed Hearst for the Izzet Mirror match against Phoenix and also against Greasefang, etc. You get to bring in a Braid for any type of vehicles and creature nonsense. Rending Volley primarily here for Spirits, Humans, Greasefang. It checks all the boxes. Disdainful Strokes, obviously you need different strokes for different folks, but primarily mono green. Any type of combo deck, especially Lotus Field, has a bunch of big spells in it. Also fairly decent against the control decks, except for obviously Supreme Verdict. But, hits a lot of their key spells like Teferi and such. And then one of Negate, just as a little bit more protection for your creatures or relevant spells your opponents might be casting. The downside is with this archetype, because it's not as explored, and obviously Izzet Phoenix is a little bit more of a more known quantity, this deck doesn't really have as much iteration to it, as much changes, etc. So you're going to see a lot of the same cards. This version, really the only notable difference is Ledger Shredders are added instead of Balmor Captain, which obviously gives you a kind of go big threat as opposed to a go wide threat, and it's a flyer, both of which are nice to have access to. You're shaving a copy of Make Disappear in this one. You're running a little bit different spread of removal spells, and you're running one of Strangle, one of Spikefield Hazard. They're choosing to run Lightning Axe, does kill bigger creatures, so that can be relevant in some spots. Whether you're running 19 or 20 lands, they're choosing to run a 20th to be able to run Castle Embereth. Once again, turning your tokens into bigger creatures. They're running a little bit more in the top end cantrip department with 4 of them, 1 mine, 4 Treasure Cruise. Not a terrible place to be, I don't think. But it remains to be seen what is your best choices. Obviously, with Ledger Shredders, you're a little bit more likely to fill up your graveyard, making Treasure Cruise a slightly better card. Sideboard, still seeing a lot of the same things. Still seeing copies of Rending Volley, copy of Fry, very similar in matchups. Good against humans, good against spirits, good against Greasefang. Also can bring in Fry against some of the control decks. Braid, once again, Gruul vehicles, anything packing a bunch of artifacts. What you might want to bring in against mono green to be able to hit random things things like Damping Sphere or things like that make your deck a little bit worse. So, always nice to have a split on your removal for things like that. Ether Gust, obviously, this also comes in against mono green along with the Disdainful Strokes, giving you a lot of utility of what you're bringing in. Although Ether Gust obviously good against most of their deck, not good against Karn. Stroke good against Karn, not good against your old Growth Troll. You get the picture. This deck is still fairly early in development. There were some variants of Izzet Pyromancer floating around even before the printing of Third Path Iconoclast, but this certainly boosted the power of the deck and gives you a little bit more reason to run it over something like Arclight Phoenix. For those of you Izzet mages who want something alternative in your bag for, if your local meta has a ton of graveyard hate, so you have some Greasefang players and some other Izzet Phoenix players, people start packing things like Leyline of the Void in addition to, their Graveyard Trespassers and Kalidases and whatnot. Maybe you should consider running this deck for a couple of weeks to kind of shuffle things up a little bit. You still get to play the powerful Delve spell of Treasure Cruise, but without being quite as reliant on the graveyard with things like Temporal Trespass and Arclight Phoenix. Obviously, you're not quite as resilient into removal, but if you play things smartly, like maybe not playing your Iconoclasts or Young Pyromancers until turn 3 to be able to cast a spell to get a little bit of value off them, things like that. Or obviously maybe playing at turn 4, casting a couple spells, getting a couple tokens. Things like that can obviously kind of offset the vulnerability to removal spells this deck might have versus the Graveyard Hate. So that's the primary difference of the two main Izzet decks that you'll see played in the format. As far as the matchup spread, a little bit harder to predict, but probably very similar to the Izzet Phoenix lists. You're probably pretty solid into the aggressive decks. You're probably okay against control. You're a little bit struggle against the go over the top decks and without access to Disdainful Strokes or Ether Gusts or Negates out of the sideboard. And then once you get access to that, those matchups get a little bit better in the post-board games. So probably a very similar spread to Phoenix without being a little bit less vulnerable to Graveyard Hate and a little bit more vulnerable to hard removal. So, as always, if you like these quick deck overviews, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, leave me a constructive comment down below, and let me know what deck you might like to see us cover next.